You know, some people just can't stand to see others succeed, especially when that success comes with a V12 symphony and the kind of Italian engineering that makes grown men weep. My mistake, apparently, was enjoying the fruits of my labor in the form of a rather stunning obsidian black Lamborghini, a machine that, in my quiet, upscale neighborhood, turned out to be less a symbol of aspiration and more a bright red, or in this case, jet black flag, to a particularly entitled bull named Karen. This wasn't just any HOA Karen. This was the queen mother of them all, a woman whose physical presence was as overwhelming as her sense of authority, and she decided my car, my beautiful, painstakingly acquired Lambo, was a personal affront to her reign, culminating in her actually, physically, jumping on its carbon fiber hood because of a no supercar rule she seemingly invented on the spot. Little did she, or her equally insufferable husband with his budget Corvette aspirations, realize that their precarious financial world, propped up by what I suspected was misappropriated HOA funds, was teetering on a foundation built by the very person they chose to target, me, the owner of the dealership network from which their own finance chariots and those of several of their cronies precariously dangled. Their rampant, idiotic spending and missed payments were about to become my perfectly legal and deeply satisfying wrecking ball. My journey to Lamborghini ownership hadn't been a sprint. It was a marathon of calculated risks, relentless hard work in the automotive sales and financing industry, and a genuine passion for exceptional vehicles that had eventually allowed me to build a significant dealership group. The Aventador wasn't just a car. It was a milestone, a piece of rolling art that represented years of dedication. Our neighborhood was pleasant, affluent even, but generally low-key. Nice BMWs, the occasional Porsche, but nothing that screamed for attention quite like the Lambo. For the first few months, it was mostly appreciative nods, a few curious questions from neighbors. Then came Karen. She was, to put it mildly, a presence. Everything about her was large, her voice, her permed hair, her sense of self-importance, and yes, her physical frame, which she carried with the unshakable conviction of someone who believed the world was her personal stage and everyone else merely supporting cast. Her official title was HOA president, but neighborhood dictator felt more apt. Her husband, a perpetually frowning man named Gary, was her shadow, often seen polishing his aging, base-model Corvette with a fervor usually reserved for religious relics, all while nodding sagely at Karen's pronouncements. I'd always found it slightly amusing, this pairing, his aspirational sports car, so clearly overshadowed by the very thing his wife would soon come to despise in my driveway. The first signs of trouble were subtle, as they often are with tyrants in training. A passive-aggressive comment from Karen at a rare community barbecue about ostentatious displays, while her eyes flicked pointedly towards my parked car. A note slipped under my wiper about ensuring my vehicle was parked entirely within designated lines, even though it always was, perfectly. I dismissed it as typical HOA power tripping, the kind of minor annoyance one learns to live with. I even made a point of being overly friendly to Karen, offering a cheerful wave whenever I saw her, which usually resulted in a purse-lipped glare that could curdle milk. I vaguely recalled hearing whispers amongst other, more timid residents about Karen's aggressive fining policies and her tendency to invent rules ad hoc, but it hadn't directly impacted me until the Lambo arrived. I run a complex business, managing multiple dealerships, dealing with high-stakes finance, and navigating the cutthroat automotive market. A little HOA drama seemed almost quaint by comparison, easily managed with polite deflection. What I hadn't factored in was the potent, almost chemical reaction that raw, undiluted jealousy can have on a certain personality type when confronted with something they desire but cannot attain, or worse, believe others don't deserve. Karen, I would soon learn, was a textbook example, and my Aventador was the catalyst that would strip away her thin veneer of neighborhood civility and reveal the seething resentment beneath. Her initial tactics were small, annoying jabs, like complaining my engine noise was disruptive, despite me always adhering to quiet hours and coasting through the neighborhood at low RPMs. It was the vet, ironically, that often rumbled louder. The hypocrisy was already starting to brew, a bitter taste I was just beginning to recognize. The escalation began with an emergency HOA newsletter, a poorly photocopied sheet that appeared on everyone's doorstep one Tuesday morning. Tucked between reminders about lawn maintenance and upcoming gutter cleaning schedules was a new, rather vaguely worded addendum to the community guidelines. Prohibition of non-conforming vehicles. My blood pressure ticked up a notch. What precisely was a non-conforming vehicle? The description that followed was a masterpiece of ambiguous pettiness. It spoke of vehicles not in keeping with the community's aesthetic standards, excessively powerful or performance-oriented, and those that could be construed as disruptive due to their exotic nature. There was no mention of specific makes or models, no horsepower limits, no objective criteria whatsoever. It was a Karen-crafted catch-all, designed for maximum selective enforcement. It might as well have had a picture of my Lamborghini stapled to it. I called the HOA management company, the one listed at the bottom of the newsletter, hoping for some clarity. The weary-sounding administrative assistant on the other end could only tell me that the new rule was enacted by the board, primarily at the strong recommendation of the president, Ms. Henderson Karen. When I asked for the minutes of the meeting where this was discussed and voted upon, I was met with a hesitant pause, then a promise to look into it, which I knew was code for never going to happen. My next step was a direct approach. I caught Karen watering her aggressively manicured, unnaturally green lawn later that day. "Karen," I began, keeping my tone measured and polite, "I was hoping to get some clarification on this new non-conforming vehicle rule." She turned, a smug little smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's quite simple, really. We're just trying to maintain the quiet, understated elegance of our community. Some vehicles simply don't fit that profile." She didn't even try to hide the pointed look she gave my garage. "And what profile is that exactly?" I pressed. "My car is legally registered, insured, and quieter than many commercial trucks that pass through. Is your husband's Corvette considered non-conforming?" "It's certainly a sports car." Her smile tightened. "Gary's Corvette is a classic American sports car. It's different. It has heritage. These flashy foreign supercars are just gaudy." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy was breathtaking. So, a decades-old design, mass-produced Chevy was heritage, while a meticulously engineered Italian masterpiece was gaudy. It was clear this wasn't about aesthetics or noise. It was about her. Later that week, Gary himself tried to corner me as I was getting my mail. He puffed out his chest, trying to appear authoritative. "Look, Davies," he began, his tone attempting gruffness, but falling short into whiny. "Karen's right, you know. That thing you drive, it's just not for around here. Makes people uncomfortable." "Really, Gary?" I replied, leaning against the mailbox. "Which people? Because several neighbors have told me they love seeing it. Or is it just one specific person who's uncomfortable, perhaps because it makes her own vehicle choices feel a bit inadequate?" He flushed a dull red. "It's about community standards," he blustered. "And your car is lowering the tone." I just raised an eyebrow. The notion that a Lamborghini Aventador could lower the tone of anything, short of a monster truck rally, was patently absurd. This was the moment I decided to dig a little deeper. I started by requesting the HOA's financial statements and meeting minutes for the past year. There was resistance, of course. More delays, more excuses. But I was persistent, citing the HOA bylaws that entitled me to view them. What I eventually received was heavily redacted and suspiciously thin, but even then, there were red flags, vague vendor payments, unusually high administrative expenses, and a lack of detailed breakdowns for significant expenditures. It smelled off. The official warnings started appearing on my windshield, bright orange stickers threatening fines for violation of C, R Section 4, Subsection B, non-conforming vehicle. They were always placed right in my line of sight, a daily dose of Karen's passive aggression. I'd peel them off, photograph them for my growing file, and continue to drive my car, albeit with a new layer of vigilance. I wasn't going to be bullied out of enjoying my own property, my own hard-earned vehicle. But I could feel the tension ratcheting up. Karen's glares became more venomous, her muttered comments louder as I drove past. She was like a pressure cooker, and I had a sinking feeling the lid was about to blow. Her obsession was palpable. She'd be at her window, peeking through the blinds, whenever she heard the Lambo's engine, her silhouette a bulky, ominous shape. It was no longer just about a car. It was about control, about her perceived authority being challenged, and perhaps most significantly, about a deep-seated envy she couldn't conceal. The day it happened was a Saturday, one of those perfect late spring afternoons where the sun felt warm but not scorching, the kind of day practically engineered for a leisurely drive with the windows down. I'd just returned from a coffee run. The low thrum of the 12 a comforting sound as I pulled into my driveway. I switched off the engine, the resulting silence almost amplifying the beauty of the car as it sat there, gleaming under the sunlight. I was gathering my phone and keys when I heard it, a furious, surprisingly fast thumping of footsteps on the pavement. I looked up, and there was Karen, storming towards my car like a rhinoceros with a vendetta. Her face was a mask of pure rage, crimson and contorted. She wasn't just angry, she looked unhinged. "I have had enough of this thing in our neighborhood," she shrieked, her voice cracking. Before I could even react, before I could form a word of protest or even open my door, she did the unthinkable. With a surprising, almost shocking burst of momentum for a woman of her considerable girth, she launched herself, quite literally, onto the hood of my Lamborghini. There was a sickening crunch of carbon fiber, a screech of protesting metal and paint. I sat there, frozen for a millisecond, the sheer audacity of the act short-circuiting my brain. Then, pure, cold fury washed over me. She was actually bouncing, yes, bouncing, on the hood, her substantial weight causing further creaks and groans from the violated bodywork. "No supercar means no supercar," she screamed, spittle flying. "You think you're better than everyone. You think the rules don't apply to you." It was a full-blown adult tantrum, executed with the destructive force of a small wrecking ball. I threw open the door, adrenaline surging. "Karen, get off my car! Are you insane?" My voice was louder than I intended, sharp with disbelief and rage. She scrambled off, clumsy and red-faced, leaving behind a spiderweb of cracks on the hood, a deep dent, and long, ugly scratches where her shoes, or perhaps buttons on her clothes, had scraped across the pristine paint. She stood there, panting, hands on her hips, a look of manic triumph on her face. "There," she gasped. "Maybe now you'll listen. This neighborhood has standards." Gary, her ever-present lapdog, came scurrying out of their house, drawn by the commotion. He saw the scene, me aghast. His wife, disheveled but defiant. My clearly damaged, multi-$100,000 supercar, and his immediate reaction was, predictably, to defend her. "What's going on here?" he blustered, trying to sound authoritative. "Karen, are you all right?" "He wouldn't listen, Gary," Karen wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He keeps flaunting this monstrosity. I had to do something." I was already on the phone with the police, my voice tight but controlled. "Yes, I need to report an act of vandalism. My neighbor has just intentionally damaged my vehicle. Yes, I have her here." Karen's face paled slightly at the mention of police, but her defiance quickly returned. "He's the one breaking the rules," she yelled towards my phone. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the shouting. Their expressions ranged from shocked to cautiously curious. I made sure to take multiple photos of the damage from every angle, Karen and Gary glowering in the background. When the officers arrived, Karen launched into a rambling, incoherent justification about HOA rules, community aesthetics, and my supposed arrogance. I calmly presented my side. My legally owned vehicle, parked on my property, was physically assaulted and damaged by my neighbor. I showed them the freshly minted no supercar rule, pointing out its vague and targeted nature. The officers, to their credit, looked distinctly unimpressed with Karen's tirade, especially when she proudly admitted to jumping on the car to enforce the rules. They took statements, documented the damage, and informed Karen she was likely facing charges for malicious mischief or vandalism. The look of stunned disbelief on her face as the officer handed her a preliminary incident report was almost worth the price of the hood repair. Almost. As the tow truck carefully winched my wounded Aventador onto its flatbed, destined for a specialist repair shop, a cold, hard resolve solidified within me. This wasn't just about a damaged car anymore. This was about malicious intent, about abuse of power, about a level of entitlement that was simply staggering. Karen had escalated this far beyond petty HOA squabbles. She had crossed a line, and I decided then and there that the consequences for her actions would be far more significant than a mere fine or a stern talking to. She and her enabling husband were about to discover just how badly they had misjudged their target. The fight was on, and I was going to use every legal and financial tool at my disposal. The immediate aftermath of Karen's hood-jumping extravaganza was a whirlwind of insurance calls, police reports, and obtaining repair quotes that made my eyes water, even though I knew the car's value. The specialist body shop, one accustomed to high-end exotics, confirmed significant damage to the carbon fiber hood, underlying structures, and the intricate paintwork. The bill would be astronomical. But beyond the financial sting, which I could absorb, was a burgeoning sense of strategic purpose. Karen's assault had been a declaration of war, and I was not one to back down from a fight, especially when so thoroughly provoked. My first call, after the insurance adjuster, was to my lawyer. We discussed the vandalism charges, the civil suit for damages I intended to file against Karen personally, and the clear evidence of her premeditated malice. But my mind was already working on a deeper level. Karen's unhinged behavior, her utter conviction in her right to enforce a nonsensical rule through violence, her husband Gary's blustering support, it all reeked of people living in a fantasy world, one where consequences didn't apply to them. And it got me thinking about their finances, their lifestyle. That old Corvette of Gary's, Karen's always new outfits for HOA meetings, their meticulously, if tastelessly, decorated home. Where was the money coming from? Especially given their public service and vaguely defined employment. It was time to turn over some rocks. This is where my day job, or rather, my empire, came into play. Owning a network of car dealerships means I have a deep understanding of auto financing, credit, and the often precarious ways people acquire and maintain their vehicles. On a hunch, fueled by a burning sense of indignation, I decided to see if Karen or Gary, or any of their close HOA board allies, happened to be customers of any of my dealerships, or the financing arms we worked closely with. It was a long shot, perhaps, but worth investigating. I made a few discreet inquiries through my own internal systems, being careful to ensure everything was above board and compliant with privacy regulations. I wasn't looking for dirt. I was looking for financial vulnerabilities that they themselves had created. It didn't take long. A senior manager in my group's financing department, a sharp woman named Maria who had a knack for remembering details, called me back. "Mr. Davies," she began, her voice cautious, "you asked about any prominent accounts related to a certain HOA. Well, it's funny you should mention it. We have a few individuals from that area who are, let's say, familiar to our collections department." My ears perked up. "Go on, Maria." "Well," she continued, "a Gary Henderson has a loan with us for a Chevrolet Corvette. It's an older model, but he financed it through one of our subprime lenders a few years back. His payment history is spotty, currently 2 months delinquent." Bingo. Gary, the staunch defender of community standards, couldn't even keep up payments on his budget sports car. "And his wife, Karen Henderson?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Nothing under her name directly through us," Maria said, "but let me check linked accounts or addresses. Ah, here we go. She's a co-signer on a loan for a late-model SUV, financed through the same subprime channel, taken out by a Ms. Patricia Evans, who, I see from the file notes, is listed as the HOA treasurer." My eyes widened. This was getting interesting. Patricia Evans, the HOA treasurer, was one of Karen's staunchest allies on the board, a woman who echoed Karen's every pronouncement with doe-eyed devotion. "How's that account looking, Maria?" "Also delinquent, sir," Maria reported. 3 months behind. We've sent several notices." This was more than just a lucky break. It was a pattern. I asked Maria to discreetly cross-reference other HOA board members against our client database, focusing on those known to be in Karen's inner circle. The results were astounding. 2 more board members, both vocal supporters of Karen's iron-fisted rule, were also financing vehicles through my network, and both were significantly behind on their payments. One had a luxury sedan teetering on the brink of repossession, and the other, a large pickup truck, was already on the to-be-collected list. It was a house of cards, all financed through my companies, all on the verge of collapse due to their own fiscal irresponsibility. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. These people, so quick to judge my lawfully acquired Lamborghini, so eager to impose punitive standards on others, were themselves failing to meet basic financial obligations. And where was their money going? The already suspicious HOA financial statements I'd seen earlier suddenly took on a new light. The vague consulting fees, the exorbitant landscaping costs for Karen's prize, winning chemically enhanced lawn, perhaps? The constant special projects that never seemed to materialize. It all started to paint a picture of systemic mismanagement, potentially even outright embezzlement, with HOA funds being siphoned off to prop up their unsustainable lifestyles, including those very car payments they were now missing. They were likely using community money for down payments, for initial installments. And when that dried up or became too risky to divert, their charade started to crumble. My lawyer was fascinated by this development. While the car repossessions would be a separate matter, handled by the dealership according to contract law for non-payment, the implication of their financial disarray, juxtaposed with their aggressive HOA enforcement and questionable HOA spending, could be incredibly powerful in both the civil suit against Karen and in shaking up the HOA itself. I had them. Not just for the damage to my car, but potentially for a much larger pattern of abuse and financial misconduct. The smoking gun wasn't just the dent in my hood. It was the trail of defaulted car loans leading right back to the heart of Karen's corrupt little empire. The investigation was no longer just about me and my Lamborghini. It was about exposing a rotten core within our community leadership. The pieces were all falling into place, creating a rather grim but satisfying mosaic of incompetence and hypocrisy. With the evidence of their defaulted car loans stacking up, confirmed legally and meticulously by my dealership's finance and collections departments, the next phase of my counteroffensive was ready to launch. It would be a two-pronged attack, a direct legal strike against Karen for the vandalism, and a carefully orchestrated series of vehicle repossessions that would hit her and her cronies where it truly hurt: their image, their mobility, and their already precarious finances. First, the lawsuit. My attorney drafted a blistering complaint against Karen Henderson, detailing the unprovoked attack, the extensive damage to the Lamborghini, the estimated repair costs, which were eye-watering, as expected for bespoke carbon fiber work and specialized paint, and a claim for punitive damages given the malicious and willful nature of her actions. We included witness statements from the neighbors who had seen her on the car, the police report, and even stills from my security camera footage, which, though not capturing the initial jump perfectly due to an angle, clearly showed her on the hood and her aggressive demeanor immediately before and after. Serving her was a moment I wish I could have witnessed personally, but my lawyer advised against it. He did, however, recount with some amusement the process server's report, which described Karen turning several shades of purple before snatching the papers and slamming the door. Simultaneously, my dealership group initiated the formal repossession process for Gary Henderson's Corvette and the SUV co-signed by Karen, and registered to Patricia Evans, the HOA treasurer. We also greenlit the repossession of the luxury sedan belonging to another board member, a perpetually smug man named Richard, and the large pickup truck owned by a woman named Brenda, Karen's most vocal sycophant. All these individuals were significantly in arrears, had ignored multiple payment demands and official notices of intent to repossess, and were clearly in breach of their financing agreements. This wasn't vengeance. This was business. They failed to pay. They lost the cars. It was as simple and as brutal as that. The beauty of it was that their own profligate spending and financial irresponsibility had handed me the tools for their undoing. The repossessions were scheduled to happen almost concurrently, a coordinated sweep. I wasn't physically present for these either. Maintaining a professional distance was key, but I received detailed and, frankly, delightful updates from the repossession teams. Gary Henderson's Corvette was apparently the easiest. He was reportedly out, and the tow truck operator hooked it up from his driveway with minimal fuss. When Gary returned later to find an empty oil stain where his pride and joy used to be, neighbors reported he simply stood there, mouth agape, for a good 10 minutes before stomping inside. Karen and Patricia Evans, the treasurer, were a different story. The repo team arrived for Patricia's SUV while Karen was visiting. According to the team leader, the two women came charging out of the house like a pair of enraged badgers. Karen, apparently forgetting her own recent act of vehicle violence, tried to physically block the tow truck, screaming about harassment and theft. Patricia was wailing about needing the car for HOA business, which likely meant shopping trips and spa days, given the state of their finances. The repo agent, a stoic professional well-versed in such histrionics, calmly presented the legal paperwork and informed them that if they interfered further, he would call the police to have them removed. The sight of their official default notices, bearing the letterhead of a financing company they now undoubtedly realized was connected to me, seemed to deflate them slightly, replaced by a look of dawning horror. They continued to shout and make threats, but the SUV was eventually hooked up and driven away, leaving them fuming on the curb. The repossession of Richard's luxury sedan and Brenda's oversized pickup reportedly followed similar patterns of initial disbelief, followed by impotent rage and theatrical protestations. The neighborhood must have been quite the spectacle that day, with tow trucks making repeated visits to the homes of its most prominent HOA board members. The news spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the neighborhood dictator and her chief lieutenants were carless, or at least significantly downsized in their vehicular grandeur. The symbolism was potent. These were the people who had tried to dictate what I could drive, who had attacked my property based on an invented rule, and now their own symbols of status, acquired on shaky credit and likely propped up by misused funds, were being unceremoniously hauled away. The delicious irony was that their attempts to maintain an image of affluence and authority had led them to overextend themselves with my company's financing. They had, in essence, handed me the rope with which to hang their pretensions. The connection between me, the owner of the dealership network, and the repossessions quickly became apparent to them. I imagined the furious, panicked phone calls flying between Karen, Gary, Patricia, and the others. The realization that the quiet, Lamborghini-driving neighbor they had tormented was not just some random wealthy guy, but the very entity holding the keys to their financed lifestyles, must have been a particularly bitter pill to swallow. This wasn't just about my car anymore. It was about accountability. Their spending on these vehicles, while HOA coffers were either being mismanaged or outright pilfered, highlighted a profound disconnect from reality and responsibility. They were so focused on controlling others and maintaining their petty fiefdom that they neglected their own basic obligations. And now, the chickens, or rather, the tow trucks, had come home to roost. The lawsuit for the Lamborghini was moving forward, and the cost of defending it, coupled with the sudden loss of their vehicles and the public humiliation, was clearly taking its toll. The whispers in the neighborhood turned from gossip about my gaudy car to shocked speculation about the financial state of their HOA leadership. The foundation of Karen's power, built on intimidation and a veneer of fiscal propriety, was crumbling before her very eyes, all because she couldn't resist the urge to jump on a car she envied. The combined impact of the lawsuit and the wave of repossessions sent shockwaves through not only Karen's inner circle, but the entire HOA community. The carefully constructed facade of the infallible, all-powerful HOA board, led by the indomitable Karen Henderson, had developed significant, very public cracks. Suddenly, the neighborhood dictator looked less like a figure of authority and more like a desperate, overextended individual whose bluff had been called in spectacular fashion. Her attempts to project an image of affluent control were starkly contrasted by the sight of tow trucks methodically removing vehicles from her and her cronies' driveways. Gary, deprived of his Corvette, was reportedly seen sulking around their yard, his usual bluster completely gone, replaced by a defeated slump. Karen herself became a less frequent sight. The imperious patrolling of the neighborhood ceased. When she was seen, often being driven by a reluctant-looking acquaintance in a decidedly non-luxury vehicle, she looked harried and furious, a far cry from the smugly confident tyrant of weeks past. The lawsuit for the Lamborghini damage was progressing. My lawyer informed me that Karen's initial attempts to have it dismissed on grounds of HOA enforcement rights were soundly rejected by the judge, who apparently made some pointed remarks about the distinction between community bylaws and outright vandalism. The legal bills were mounting for her, a fact that undoubtedly added to her stress, given her now publicly exposed financial vulnerabilities. The other board members whose cars had been repossessed, Patricia, Richard, and Brenda, were equally distressed. Their predicament was a hot topic of gossip. How could the HOA treasurer be unable to manage her own car payments? How could these self-proclaimed guardians of community standards be so fiscally irresponsible? These questions, once whispered, were now being asked openly. This paved the way for other, less timid residents to finally voice their own long-standing grievances about Karen's regime. Stories began to emerge about arbitrary fines, selective enforcement of other rules, and a general lack of transparency in HOA decision-making and finances. My quiet investigation into the HOA's books, combined with the now undeniable evidence of personal financial distress among its leadership, painted an increasingly damning picture. I decided it was time to share some of this information, carefully and legally, with the wider community. I compiled a neutral, factual summary of the publicly available information regarding the repossessions, confirming they were due to defaulted loans, and cross-referenced it with some of the more glaring inconsistencies I'd found in the HOA's published, though heavily redacted, financial summaries. I didn't make accusations of embezzlement directly, as that would require a full forensic audit, but I highlighted the unusually high discretionary spending, the lack of detailed invoices for major expenses, and the curious timing of certain large payments that coincided with periods just before board members acquired new assets or took lavish vacations. I then requested, as was my right as a homeowner, an emergency HOA meeting to discuss the current financial standing and leadership stability of the Homeowners Association. The request, backed by signatures from several other now emboldened residents, couldn't be ignored. The emergency meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a room that suddenly felt far too small for the charged atmosphere. Karen, Gary, Patricia, and the other affected board members were present, looking pale and defensive. The usual smugness was gone, replaced by a hunted look. I stood up and calmly and methodically presented my concerns. I spoke about the need for transparency, for fiscal responsibility, and for leadership that acted in the best interests of the entire community, not just themselves. I didn't need to mention my Lamborghini or Karen jumping on it. Everyone knew that backstory. I focused on the pattern of financial mismanagement. When I laid out the timeline of their vehicle acquisitions and the subsequent defaults, juxtaposed against questionable HOA expenditures, a murmur went through the room. Patricia Evans, the treasurer, attempted a blustering defense, talking about unexpected personal hardships and complex financial arrangements. But her explanations sounded weak and unconvincing, especially when other residents started asking pointed questions about specific budget items and a lack of accessible, detailed records. One older gentleman, a retired accountant, stood up and demanded a full independent audit of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years. The motion was seconded immediately by half a dozen people. Karen tried to shut it down, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, claiming it was an unnecessary expense and an attack on the board's integrity. But her authority was shattered. The vote for the audit passed overwhelmingly. In the weeks that followed, the House of Cards well and truly collapsed. The independent auditors uncovered a litany of financial irregularities, including misappropriated funds, payments to phantom vendors, and clear evidence that HOA money had been used to cover personal expenses and even help make down payments on some of those now repossessed vehicles. Karen, Gary, Patricia, and 2 other board members were implicated directly. The fallout was swift. Faced with undeniable evidence of their misconduct, the implicated board members resigned in disgrace. Some faced potential legal action from the HOA itself to recoup the stolen funds. Karen and Gary put their house up for sale, unable to sustain their lifestyle without the supplementary income from the HOA coffers, and now facing crippling legal fees from my lawsuit, which they were clearly losing. The no supercar rule was unceremoniously struck from the HOA bylaws at the very next meeting, convened by an interim board made up of genuinely concerned residents. My Lamborghini, meanwhile, was meticulously repaired, its carbon fiber hood gleaming anew, a testament to both its resilience and the sweet taste of justice. The day it returned, I took it for a slow, deliberate drive through the neighborhood. The waves I received were no longer hesitant or fearful, but genuinely friendly, even appreciative. The reign of the oversized HOA Karen was definitively over, not with a whimper, but with the roar of a 12 and the thud of repossessed cars hitting the auction block. It was a reminder that sometimes the most effective way to deal with a bully who jumps on your dreams is to systematically, legally, and financially dismantle the rotten pedestal they stand on. And believe me, that satisfaction is far more enduring than any superficial scratch.